Aaliyah Cooper was only 22 years old, but life had already made her tired. She worked 2 jobs every single day: morning shifts in a hospital cafeteria and evening shifts stocking shelves at a grocery store. Between unpaid bills, rent stress, and nursing school night classes, she barely had time to breathe. Every morning at exactly 6:15 a.m., she walked 3 blocks to catch the number 47 bus. That's where she first noticed him. An elderly white homeless man slept beside a closed laundromat near the bus stop. A flattened cardboard box was his bed. A worn gray blanket covered his thin body. Beside him sat one black trash bag filled with all his belongings. Most people ignored him. Some crossed the street to avoid him. For 2 weeks, Aaliyah did the same. She told herself she had nothing to give. Then one cold morning in March, she looked at the sandwich in her bag, peanut butter and jelly. She had packed 2 by mistake. She stared at the old man, then slowly walked over. "Excuse me?" she said softly. "I made extra. You want this?" The man opened sharp blue eyes and studied her carefully. Then he said something unexpected. "You need it more than I do." Aaliyah blinked. "That's debatable," she replied. For the first time, the old man smiled. He accepted the sandwich with both hands like it was treasure. "Thank you, Miss Aaliyah." "Thank you, Miss Aaliyah. I'm George." The next morning she brought coffee. The morning after that, a banana. Then another sandwich. Soon it became routine. Every day at 6:15 a.m. George was always waiting. Sometimes they talked before the bus came. He asked about her classes. She asked about his life. That's when the strange stories began. "I used to fly helicopters," George said one morning. "For who?" "People whose names never made newspapers." Another day, he said, worked around senators once. Dangerous places. Aaliyah assumed he was confused. Maybe mentally ill. Maybe lonely. Still, she listened. One rainy morning, a businessman walked past and kicked George's blanket into a puddle. Aaliyah snapped instantly. "Hey, what's wrong with you?" The man kept walking. George quietly pulled the wet blanket back. "You didn't have to defend me," he said. "Yes, I did." George looked at her for a long moment. Then he whispered, "You've got fight in you." By May, feeding George was automatic. Wake up at 5 o'clock. Make 2 sandwiches. Pour coffee in the thermos. Walk 3 blocks. Sit beside George. Catch the bus. One night, she stood in her tiny apartment doing math. Bills overdue. Fridge almost empty. But every morning, George still got breakfast. The next morning, she handed him a sandwich. George broke it in half, then handed half back to her. "Fair is fair," he said. Aaliyah turned away quickly, so he wouldn't see her cry. Life kept getting harder for Aaliyah Cooper. She was working 2 jobs, studying nursing at night, and trying to survive in an apartment that barely deserved to be called a home. The shower only worked if she kicked the pipe first. Her rent was late again. The electric company had sent a final warning notice. Still, every morning at 5 a.m., she woke up and made 2 sandwiches, one for herself, one for George, at the hospital cafeteria. Her supervisor, Mrs. Carter, noticed she looked weaker every day. Mrs. Carter was a sharp-eyed older Chinese-American woman who missed nothing. "Are you eating?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Aaliyah lied. Mrs. Carter folded her arms. "Are you feeding that homeless man again?" "His name is George." Mrs. Carter sighed and disappeared into the kitchen. She returned with warm pasta and bread. "Eat this now," she ordered. Then more softly, "He's a person. I understand. But so are you." That night, Aaliyah lay awake on the mattress on her floor, staring at the cracked ceiling. If she skipped classes, she could work extra shifts. If she walked instead of taking the bus, she could save money. If she stopped helping George, maybe she could finally catch up. She made herself a promise. 1 more week. Then she had to stop. But Friday morning came, and she still made 2 sandwiches. When she reached the bus stop, George smiled like always. She couldn't say no. Then Monday came, And George was gone. No cardboard, no blanket, no trash bag. No George. Aaliyah stood there confused, holding the sandwich and thermos. She waited through one bus, then another, then another. Still nothing. Tuesday morning, empty. Wednesday, empty. Thursday, still empty. A knot formed in her chest. After work, she walked 10 extra blocks to Mercy Street shelter. At the desk, she asked, "I'm looking for George Fletcher." Older, white man. Sleeps near Clayton bus stop. The tired worker typed into the computer, then shook her head. No record. What about hospitals? Privacy laws. Please, he's my friend. The woman looked up for the first time. People move around, honey. Happens all the time. But Aaliyah didn't believe it. That night, she called 3 hospitals. No one would tell her anything. On the 7th day, she returned to the bus stop with a paper bag. Inside was a sandwich and a note. "Hope you're okay, Aaliyah." She placed it beside the wall where he used to sleep, then turned to leave. That afternoon, on the ride home, she looked out the bus window and froze. George was back, sitting in the same place, thinner, weaker. His face looked drawn and pale. She jumped off at the next stop and ran back. "George?" He looked up slowly. For a second, he seemed confused, then smiled faintly. "Miss Aaliyah, where were you?" "I checked shelters, hospitals. I thought something happened." "Had a little spell," he said weakly. "You don't look okay." "I'm upright," he replied. "That counts." Then she noticed it, a fresh scar across the back of his hand. Pink. Clean. Surgical. The envelope stayed in Aaliyah's bag for 2 weeks. She touched it sometimes while riding the bus, thought about opening it, thought about George's strange stories. Helicopters, senators, secret missions. But she never opened it. She had made a promise. And promises mattered. Every morning, life continued as usual. Wake up before sunrise. Make sandwiches. Pour coffee into the thermos. Walk 3 blocks. Sit beside George. Listen to his stories. Catch the bus. But George was changing. He looked weaker each day. His hands shook more. His breathing sounded heavier. His eyes seemed tired in a way Aaliyah had never seen. "You need a doctor," she told him one morning. "I need breakfast," George replied with a crooked smile. She didn't laugh. One cold Tuesday morning, she handed him the thermos. George reached for it. Then suddenly, his hand began shaking violently. The thermos slipped. Coffee splashed across the sidewalk. "George?" His mouth moved, but no words came out. His eyes rolled backward. Then his body collapsed forward. Aaliyah caught him before his head hit the concrete. "Call 911. She screamed. People froze. A woman across the street grabbed her phone. A jogger slowed down, then kept running. 2 people at the bus stop just stared. Aaliyah lowered George gently onto his side. His breathing was shallow. His lips were pale. "Stay with me," she whispered desperately. "Come on, George. Stay with me." Minutes felt like hours. Finally, sirens. The ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed out with a stretcher. One checked George's pulse. Another asked questions. "When did this start?" "Just now." "Any family?" Aaliyah didn't hesitate. "I'm with him." They lifted George onto the stretcher. As they rolled him inside, a paramedic blocked the ambulance door. "Ma'am, family only." Aaliyah climbed in anyway. "I'm all he has." The paramedic looked at her face, then stepped aside. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Inside, machines beeped loudly. George looked small and fragile beneath oxygen tubes. Aaliyah held his hand all the way to the hospital. At St. Vincent's emergency room, doctors rushed him through double doors. A nurse guided Aaliyah into the waiting room. Green plastic chairs. Buzzing fluorescent lights. Muted television. The smell of disinfectant. She sat there, still holding the empty thermos. Her phone buzzed. Work. She texted Mrs. Carter. Emergency. George collapsed. At hospital. Reply came instantly. I'll cover you. Keep me updated. Hours passed. Finally, a nurse called her name. Aaliyah Cooper? She stood so fast her knees almost buckled. At the intake desk sat a woman named Rachel Williams. George Fletcher is stable, she said flatly. Severe dehydration. Possible stroke. Aaliyah exhaled shakily. Can I see him? Rachel continued typing. There's a problem. No ID, no insurance, no emergency contact. He'll be transferred to County General. Aaliyah's heart dropped. County General? People wait there for days. It's policy. He's a veteran, Aaliyah said firmly. Rachel looked up. Proof? No, but he told me. We need documentation. Then a calm voice spoke behind them. Run the check. A doctor in a white coat stepped forward. Dr. Patelna. Rachel frowned. Without proof? Courtesy search, Dr. Patel said. He looked at Aaliyah. If there's a match, we keep him. Rachel typed. The seconds felt endless. Then the computer beeped. Rachel leaned closer. Her expression changed completely. There's a match. She scrolled silently. Then whispered. George Allen Fletcher. Honorable discharge. More scrolling. Her eyes widened. Service record heavily redacted. Dr. Patel moved beside her. What does that mean? Rachel swallowed. It means classified. Aaliyah stood frozen. George had told the truth. All of it. Dr. Patel straightened. Move him to Ward C, then looked at Aaliyah. You can see him soon. For the first time, she realized George Fletcher was never just an old man at a bus stop. George remained in the hospital for 3 weeks. For the first time in months, he had a warm bed, clean clothes, medicine, and regular meals. Aaliyah visited whenever she could before work. After work, sometimes skipping sleep just to sit beside him. He looked stronger each day. His face had more color. His hands shook less. But his eyes carried something new. Peace. One afternoon, Aaliyah entered his room carrying cookies from the hospital cafeteria. George was sitting upright with a small leather notebook in his lap, writing carefully. What's that? She asked. My memory, George said softly. He closed the notebook and handed it to her. Inside were names, dates, locations, phone numbers, military terms she didn't understand. Some pages were neat, others looked rushed and desperate. What is this? If anyone ever asks what happened to me, George said, you'll know where to start. Aaliyah looked at him carefully. You really did all those things, didn't you? George smiled faintly. Some things. She sat quietly, overwhelmed. That week, Aaliyah used part of her paycheck to buy George something special, a thick navy blue fleece blanket. When she placed it over his legs, George froze. His eyes filled with tears. No one's done something kind for me in 20 years, he whispered. Aaliyah squeezed his hand. Well, somebody shoulda. He held her hand for a long time. No words needed. Then, in late August, the call came. Ludian a.m. Aaliyah stood in her kitchen pouring coffee when her phone rang. Miss Cooper? Yes? This is Pine Valley VA Care Center. Her stomach dropped. I'm calling about George Fletcher. She gripped the counter. He passed peacefully in his sleep last night. The room went silent. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We're sorry for your loss. Loss. The word echoed. An hour later, she arrived at the facility. A nurse handed her a plastic bag. Inside were George's few belongings. 3 shirts, old shoes, the navy blanket, the notebook, and a small envelope addressed to her. Handshaking, she opened it. Inside was a photograph. George, decades younger, standing tall in military dress uniform. Rows of medals across his chest. Beside him stood 2 powerful men in suits. One was a famous retired senator. On the back of the photo, George had written 3 words. Remember the girl? Tears filled Aaliyah's eyes. She went home, sat on her mattress, then pulled out the sealed envelope George had given her weeks earlier, the one she promised to mail if something happened. Slowly, she opened it, and everything was about to change. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter. The paper was old and folded neatly. Aaliyah sat on the floor and began to read. To whomever receives this, probably General Victoria Ashford. Her eyes widened. George continued, "If you're reading this, I am gone. I have no family, no money, nothing left that matters to the world. But I need you to know about someone who mattered to me. Aaliyah Cooper brought me breakfast every morning for 6 months. Not because she had to, not because anyone was watching. She did it because she saw me when the world looked away." Tears rolled down Aaliyah's face. She kept reading. "This country took everything I gave, then forgot me. But this young woman gave me dignity when I had nothing. Remember her, like she remembered me." Signed, George Fletcher. At the bottom was an address. General Victoria Ashford. Pentagon. Office of the Inspector General. Aaliyah sat frozen. George had not been lying. Not once. The next morning, she stood in line at the post office holding the envelope tightly. Part of her wanted to keep it. Part of her wanted to forget everything. But she had promised. When she reached the counter, the clerk said, $5.60. She paid with crumpled bills from her wallet, then watched the letter disappear into a bin with hundreds of others. Gone! She walked home, believing nothing would happen. George was just another forgotten man. Another veteran buried by paperwork. Another life no one cared about. 2 weeks later, a hard knock hit her apartment door at dawn. Aaliyah opened it wearing her hospital uniform. 3 military officers stood outside. Dress uniforms. Polished shoes. Serious faces. A tall colonel stepped forward. "Miss Aaliyah Cooper?" Her heart pounded. "Yes, I'm Colonel Hayes. These officers are Martinez and Carter." He paused. "We're here about George Fletcher." Her stomach dropped. Did something happen? The colonel's expression softened. General Ashford received the letter. "Aaliyah couldn't speak. She wants to meet you." The next day, Aaliyah boarded her first airplane. Everything had been arranged. Flight ticket, hotel, transportation. She stared out the window as clouds passed below. A girl who once counted coins for bus fare was flying to Washington, D.C. That night, she stayed in the nicest room she had ever seen. Soft bed, clean carpet, hot shower. Still, she barely slept. The next morning, Colonel Hayes escorted her through Pentagon security. Long hallways, flags, military officers everywhere. Then they stopped outside one door. Office of the Inspector General. Hayes looked at her. "Ready?" Aaliyah took a breath. "No." He smiled. "Good answer." The door opened, and inside waited the woman who could change everything. General Victoria Ashford stood as Aaliyah entered. Silver hair, sharp eyes, 4 stars on her shoulders. Power filled the room, but her voice was calm. "Miss Cooper," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." Aaliyah shook it nervously. Ashford opened a file marked George Fletcher. He was one of the finest intelligence officers this country ever had. Aaliyah sat stunned. Ashford continued. George flew classified rescue missions during Desert Storm, Kosovo, and operations that still remain secret. She paused. "And when he retired, we lost him." "How?" Aaliyah asked quietly. "Paperwork, PTSD, bureaucratic failure." Ashford's jaw tightened. "We failed him." Silence filled the office. Then Ashford looked directly at Aaliyah. "But George's letter wasn't really about him. It was about you." Aaliyah blinked. "Me? You gave dignity to a man the system erased." Ashford leaned forward. "That matters." Weeks later, Aaliyah testified before the Senate. Cameras flashed. Politicians watched. Her hands shook at first. Then she spoke from the heart. "I didn't help George because he was important," she said. I helped him because he was human." The room fell silent. She continued, "If we only care about people after learning they were powerful, then we've already failed." News clips of her speech spread everywhere, across America. People cried. Veterans called. Donations poured in. Soon, the George Fletcher Memorial Fund was created. Millions of dollars were raised. The money helped homeless veterans with housing, counseling, legal aid, and health care. General Ashford appointed Aaliyah as community liaison. She still worked as a nurse, but now she also helped veterans every week. 1 year later, over 2,000 veterans had received support. Aaliyah moved into a better apartment. Nothing fancy, just hate that worked. A real kitchen. Peace. But every morning she still woke up early, still made coffee, still remembered George. One autumn afternoon, she stood at Arlington National Cemetery. George had been reburied there with full military honors. His headstone stood tall beneath the trees. Aaliyah knelt and placed something on the stone. A peanut butter sandwich, wrapped in wax paper. "Same as always." "I kept my promise," she whispered. Wind moved softly through the cemetery. For a moment, she could almost hear George laugh. Aaliyah stood, smiled through tears, and walked away. Because George Fletcher was never forgotten again, and the girl who once had nothing had changed everything.